Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're doing part 86 of our Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making and compare them to their real-life fossil counterparts. So, very interestingly, we've got a whole bunch of really cool animals, some animals that we've covered before, but some new ones. We've got Master Duke coming back, some other really cool modders, so let's get stuck into this one. So we're going to be starting off with part of that. If you remember that the episode before last one, there was Netraptor and Gojira Chief and King Creative's art with doing those kind of paleo, compendium mods. So this is one of the ones that they've added on there. This is Mayur. So here's our Maiasaura, or the good mother lizard, as we would like to call it, very affectionately. But yeah, the original game one wasn't too far off what it looked like, but you can see there are some changes basically to the skull just to make it more accurate. And one thing I really like is like this little crest there, because Maiasaura is known for having like a small crest, which is like a very small crest, which is actually pretty weird. It's like a solid crest-like structure, which is thought to be used for headbutting. But I like how they interpret it as kind of like a little bit of a crest to put a pattern on. Like it's like very subtle, but I think that looks really nice. Really nice variety of colours. Netraptor always does a great job with that. So you can see those changes to the faces, very horse-like and very big beaks, not like the smaller beaks. They had much bigger beaks than we realised. They weren't duck-billed. It was more like just a horse with a huge beak. Because of the keratin sheath, we often underestimate that quite a bit. You can see that very characteristic face of them. Nice thick neck, big round body, long tail, and you can see some change of the feet as well. You can see that they don't have the original kind of played toes. They do have those hooves that was found in Edmontosaurus. I explained a little bit in the last episode in 85 because that was like the Hadrosauriformes pack, but they've got these really interesting kind of hooves that were like a flesh mitten and then would have two nails and the pinky, so that's been added into the animal here. You can see they're quite big feet there as well, long tail, very long tail. It's pretty cool. Definitely a big fan of how this guy's come out. So that's another great one, done by Netraptor, Gojira Chief, and Ken's creative art. Coming back, a lot of them are actually from OG, like Jurassic World Evolution 1, modding. So let's carry on and have a look at these guys. This next one's also done by the same group. They also made a new animal as well, did a bit of a remaster, but we've got here Camptosaurus. So this is Camptosaurus, very, very cool guy. Let's see if we can find another good picture of him. Oh, here's a good one. He's really blue, but he doesn't. It's all good. Still get a really good look at him. Nice little remaster he's done of an older mod. So Camptosaurus is a genus of plant-eating beaked ornithischian from the late Jurassic that lived in North America and potentially Europe. Its name means flexible lizard, or kind of bent lizard. So this guy was found by William Harlow Reed on September 4th, 1879 in Albany County, Wyoming, and found the bones. And then the same year, Charles Marsh described the name they find as Camptorraptor, which means kind of flexible back. And the holotype was then renamed to Camptosaurus, as the genus name was already used for a cricket, and that's quite common in dinosaurs because they give it a really cool name. Saurophagonax is another great example. It was Saurophagus, but that was originally a name of a bird, a genus name of a bird, so they have to change it. So that happens quite a lot in paleontology. Then in 1879, named Dispair, which is a type species from the quarry in Combe Bluff, Wyoming, from the Morrison, and another species, Amplus, from another quarry, which actually was thought to be a different species, but belonged to actually Allosaurus. And then there's believed to be a couple other species, but we kind of don't really know. It's got a little bit of history there. There's Opportunus and Brewowski, but the main one, Priswishki, but the main one is Camptosaurus despair. That's kind of what the main species is. And there's been some species lumped and split. There was actually the species that was originally thought to be in Depressus, which was thought to be a Camptosaurus, but now it's in its own genus Zoetodon. And while Marsh had hey, look, all these different species, a lot of taxonomy changed. A lot of them had actually lumped into Iguanodon, but now considered their own species. And there was actually the first, in 2022, the first confirmed remains of Camptosaurus were found in Spain, in Portugal, or in Spain. So would have lived with, of course, some of those animals like Miragaia and kind of the really cool animals there. And it was found there, and seemed to be closer to Camptosaurus and Draconix, which is from Portugal, and that has tentatively been placed in the genus Camptosaurus. So there may be a species of Camptosaurus living in Europe, but most of them are known from America. And there was another species that was actually found in Europe, and a couple of the species that lumped into Iguanodon. One was called Owenodon, and the other was called found to be later, so they were found to be much later relatives, and not as basal as Camptosaurus. So it's very interesting taxonomy. It's got a big taxonomic history. So Camptosaurus, you can see, is quite a heavily built animal with robust hind limbs and broad feet, and still has 4 toes. You can see that's kind of how long they've been around. The specimens belonging to due to the separate status of Uentodon, it's kind of actually really hard to tell what is actually Camptosaurus and what is Uentodon, but that's something getting sorted out. The specimens certainly belonging to Camptosaurus are from Quarry 13 and in the Morrison Formation, and are found in very deep layers, probably from the Calvanian to Oxfordian. So this is, living with animals, like Allosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Stegosaurus, Diplodocus, those kind of animals. The largest fragments indicate adult individuals reached about 6.79 meters, about 22 feet long. And though there were some individuals smaller, but they believed to reach about 5 to 6 meters and weigh between 500 to 1,000 kilograms, or pretty much half a ton to a ton. The earlier reconstructions, they actually gave it an incorrect, more rectangular profile, but now those Camptosaurus had a very triangular pointed snout, as you're going to see there, with a beak. And the teeth were more tightly packed in the jaw comparison to other euornithopods from the Morrison. And that's kind of showing they may be a little bit more further down the tree. So original kind of classification of the species was in March from 1885. It was a species of its own, the Camptosauridae, and then either considered an early member of Iguanodontidae. Molecular phylogenetics has made Camptosaurus, by definition, a part of the clade Ankyloplexa, which is a basal member. And it's thought this genus is actually closely related to later iguanodontian and hadrosaur dinosaurs, and was more derived than animals such as Dryosaurus, Drinker, and Orthnilosaurus. So it's kind of in between things like Dryosaurus and later animals such as, like hadrosaurs and like Iguanocolossus, Iguanodon, Edmontosaurus. So it's kind of the in-between. It's on the way of becoming those guys, even though that wasn't the plan. It just panned out that way. That's what phylogenetics suggests. And in terms of its paleobiology, based on studies, it may have actually believed to able to run at 25 kilometers per hour, 15 miles per hour. A tiny 9-inch fossil embryo has actually been referred to Camptosaurus and was found at the Dinosaur National Monument in the Morrison in Utah. So we have a good idea of how small they were, or how they, what they look like in the egg. Yeah, decently sized animal and quite famous. They're an animal, I think, that is quite quintessential from the Morrison. It's an animal that's really, really cool, and it's very important in the evolution. So it tells us how they moved from these, like a lot of those ornithopods, like iguanodontians and hadrosauriformes, as we'll say, came from those little guys like the Dryosaurs and really small ones, and evolved into those massive, things like Edmontosaurus, Schitungosaurus, Parasaurolophus, Iguanodon, those animals, which is really cool. It's a really cool animal that tells us a lot, and plus it's just a nice, cute little animal from the Morrison. The Morrison is a very well-known formation. It's nice to have animals fill that out. Bloody cool. Really do love this guy. Really, really awesome. So we're gonna let them run off and do their thing. As I mentioned, this was done by NetRaptor, Gozera Chief, and Ken's Creative Art, I believe. They did pretty much the same thing again. But next up, we've got by Chocolate. How can you not love chocolate? We have got another animal going to the early Cretaceous of Australia. We have got Linosaura. So here he is, Linosaura. See if we can get a nice cute little picture of these guys. Oh, there we are. Perfect. So this is Linosaura, which means Leyland's lizard. These guys are a genus of small herbivorous ornithischian dinosaur that comes from the late Aptian to early Albian of the early Cretaceous, from about 118 to 110 million years ago. It was first discovered in Dinosaur Cove in Australia, so a really famous Australian dinosaur, which is really cool. And its only known species is Linosaura Counterparts, and it was described in 1989 and named after Leonore Rich, who is a daughter of Australian paleontologist couple Tom Rich and Patricia Vickers Rich, who discovered it. And the specific name Amographica translates to friend writing, in honour of both the Friends of the Museum of Victoria and the National Geographic Society and their support for Australian paleontology. So it's quite cool. A lot of very important names in there. Linosaura was a small dinosaur, about 90 centimeters, or about 3 feet in length, and is known from several specimens, including 2 nearly complete skeletons and 2 fragmentary skulls. Herney in 2009 argued that unlike more advanced ornithischians, Linosaura lacked ossified tendons in the tail, and it's argued that the tail is noteworthy because it's among the longest of any, compared to relative to body size of any ornithischian, with the tail being 3 times as long as the rest of the body was. And combined, but yeah, he argued that the tail was noteworthy for being that long and, much longer, 3 times the body length, much longer than the other ornithischians. And as a result, had more tail vertebrae than any other ornithischian except for some hadrosaurs. However, while this could be true, subsequent revision of fossil material attributed to Linosaura by Herney in 2013 could not confidently assign the postcranial skeleton with long tails, or indeed any fossils other than the holotype and complete cranium, and then some other fossils, to Linosaura. So, because it's the holotype itself is based only on a brain case, it's really hard to tell if that exactly is Linosaur, but that's because the holotype is crap. But it is very likely that it could either be a very similar animal with the long tail, or just another species of Linosaur, or just Linosaur itself. It just can't be confidently assigned because the holotype is pretty much just a brain case and a maxilla, and there's not that much on it. So in terms of classification, Linosaur is variously being described as a hypsilopodont, a primitive ornithischian, or a primitive iguanodontian, though recent studies have not found a consensus. But some analyses describe it as a iguanodontian, non-iguanodontian ornithopod, or a neothornisischian, but some have also made it a basal member of the group Elasmara, which is interesting. So related to things like Telecan and Macrogryphosaurus and animals like that. In terms of its ecology, if you've guys seen Walking with Dinosaurs, you know this guy. There's an Australian polar dinosaur, and at the period of time, Victoria would have been within the Arctic Circle. So even though this latitude is very cold today, during the time of the dinosaurs in the early Cretaceous, it would have been a lot warmer, but they still would have experienced the kind of long days and short nights, the different, like the long nights and exterior, and that you get in the Arctic Circle. So you get sometimes really long days and really long nights depending on the season. So they would have experienced that. It's very possible in some areas the sun would have not risen for several weeks or months in winter, which means they would have had to live in the dark for perhaps months at a time. And the skull fragments show that these guys may have had quite large eyes and may have been well adapted for living in low light conditions, though it has also been interpreted as being the large eyes of just a juvenile individual rather than low light conditions. But it is certainly an adaptation that does make sense, especially if you're spending most of your time in darkness, because they don't really have the chance to really migrate. But yeah, that's really, really cool. Definitely a big fan of this mod. It's really come out rather wonderfully. I love like the long tail of it, even though it may not be Linosaur itself. It's nice to have that long tail. Really gives it a nice design, big fluffy tail. Just a really, really cute little guy all around, and Chocolate really did a wonderful job. So let them run off and do their things, and we'll have a look at the juveniles. So this was a different cosmetic. So we've got both the adults and a juvenile cosmetic. So let's have a look at this cute little cosmetic. Oh. So how can you not love your baby dinosaurs? And as I mentioned before, the big eyes of the holotype could be just because it's from a juvenile. But regardless, look at this little cutie. Definitely such a cute little guy that we just need to appreciate for a bit. Look at that cutie. Nice to see people making juvenile kind of models of their, or cosmetics of their animals, because I think baby dinosaurs are so unappreciated in this game. We definitely need some babies in these games, I think. Hopefully Jurassic World 3 has them. I really hope. But anyway, we'll carry on. So let them run off and do their thing. So next up, we've got, by Chocolate as well, we've got another really cool species. This is a Therizinosaur. This is a Barosaurus. Oh yeah, there's another. I think there's a bug that they don't come out of there, but we'll have a look at this one anyway since he's out and about. We'll get a good look at him. Really, really nice. I keep forgetting that you have to airlift them out, but that's all right. We'll have a look at this one anyway. So this is Barosaurus. So these guys are genus of Therizinosaurs, so regular things like Orthonicus and Therizinosaurus, that lived in China during the early Cretaceous of the Yixian Formation. So its first remains were found in 1996, before being formally described in 1999. And before the discovery of animals such as Sootyrannus, Barosaurus was among the heaviest dinosaurs with direct evidence of being feathered. It is known from 3 specimens, and numerous impressions of feathers structures allowed the researchers to determine the colours, which is interesting. So this is not quite right for the colour. They thought it would have been a reddish brown or a brown colour. So as I mentioned, in 1996, the peasant Li Yixian discovered the partial skeleton of a theropod near the village of Sultan, and it was confirmed to be from the lower beds of the Yixian Formation and represent a single individual. And on May 27th, 1999, discovery was announced, and it was Barosaurus inexpecticus, which was named because of Biaopao, which is kind of the city in China where it was found, and then Saurus lizard, and Inexpecticus because it was unexpected and surprising, because it's very surprising to find these animals. The holotype itself was recovered from the Jiangsu beds of the Yixian Formation in China, and these date to the early Cretaceous of about 125 million years ago. And the specimen consists of a partial subadult with the skeleton is largely disarticulated, but it is quite complete. We also have a second specimen that is preserves quite a lot of feathers as well, and I think they're adults as well. So we do have a few really good specimens, which is cool. In terms of its size, though, it was a small Therizinosaur. It measured about 2.2 meters, or about 7 feet long. But as I mentioned before, the discovery of Sootyrannus, it was the largest dinosaur known with direct evidence of being feathered. It's estimated to have weighed about 27 kilograms, or about 60 pounds, based on female length. And more advanced Therizinosaurs have 4 functional toes, but the feet of Barosaurus have reduced inner toes, showing that derived therizinosaur condition may have evolved from a 3-toed ancestor, so they didn't have the 4 toes like later Therizinosaurs. The head was also large compared to other therizinosaurs, and the lower jaw measured about the same length as the femur, and they had a shorter neck compared to other therizinosaurs, so they were kind of, something that almost kind of coming out of that. And in 2003, a pycnostyle was actually found and described, though suggesting that the original functions of pycnostyles was not linked to having large pennaceous feathers. So, as I mentioned, there's a lot of really interesting traits about it, and we'll go about the feathers and colours. So the first feather impressions come from the holotype specimen, which consists of small, slender filamentous feathers on the left arm, and it indicates that the body was predominantly covered in downy feathers, almost like things of Sinosauropteryx, but longer and around the arm. And then they kind of represented an intermediate stage between Sinosauropteryx and more advanced birds. And the tail was also covered in feathers up to about 4 to 7 centimeters long with partial filaments, without a trace of pennaceous feathers, even though that could be indicated by, or tail fan is indicated by the pycnostyle. And also unique among a lot of theropods, it also possessed a secondary coat, which much longer, simpler down feathers that rose out of the down layer. And these unique feathers are known as elongated broad filamous feathers, and were first described by JWE2 in 2009, which is quite interesting. And the way that they're differentiated from other feather types, that consist of a single unbranched feather, and most other primitive feathered dinosaurs have down-like feathers made up of 2 or more filaments, but Barosaurus, these were much longer ones, and they got to about 15% of the neck there. So they're quite long feathers, and they're usually quite broad, up to about 3 millimeters wide. And they're the broadest feathers of Sootyrannus, only 0.2 millimeters, which is quite interesting. So that shows they have very interesting different types of feathers. So they do have multiple types of feathers, so they're well on the way to kind of evolving those ones. They were almost definitely not for flight, but they could have been used for insulation or displays. Interesting as well. And they did the large feathers were ornamental, so it could have been used for displays like the tails of a peacock or something like that. And looking at these kind of melanosomes in these preserved feathers, they actually tell the color of these dinosaurs. So looking at them with electron microscopes, they found that the color of the dinosaurs to be slightly connected to physiology. So while some species of living reptiles have less diversity in shape of the melanosomes, some Maniraptorans, birds and mammals, which are endotherms, so they are warm-blooded, have more vivid colors potentially. So these feather impressions suggest that they may have had been like dark brownish colors and more brown, which is quite interesting. And a close relative, Dinosaurus, is another primitive therizinosaur found in the same formation and has very similar feathers. So that's very interesting because these kind of, now there's 2 different genera of therizinosaurs having these display feathers. So it's very likely that this could have been a common thing among therizinosaurs, which is quite cool. And this actually was a study in 2003 that defined what a feather is, and they actually stated that the feathers of a Therizinosaurus may not have been true feathers, but may have been something related to feathers, or not true feathers, but that's kind of just definitions. But for all intents and purposes, they are a feathered dinosaur. So in terms of its classification, they attribute these guys are kind of really hard to tell. Therizinosaurs originally were really hard to classify. They actually originally thought they were either sauropodomorphs or ornithischians, but now they decided to be Maniraptorans within Theropoda, and just convergently evolved all of those traits to become big herbivores. And Barosaurus was first assigned to Therizinosauridae, but now they're considered Therizinosaurina, so quite basal in that tree. Just before things like Amargasaurus and Alaxosaurus, and before you get into later Therizinosauridae. And as I mentioned in the paleobiology, we do have preserved colour from them, and looking at the microscopes, they have found chorocytes, which are cells rich in keratin, and to look in comparisons, they looked at all sorts of different things in there, and actually suggested that they did not get as warm as modern birds, mainly because they were ground-dwelling and not able to fly. And in case of primitive birds like Confuciornis, they could not fly for long periods, so they didn't have that fats, and actually the fats helped regulate their body temperature. And also, they seem to, non-avian dinosaurs may have actually shed skin much more similar to extant birds and mammals. Unlike reptiles that kind of shed in a single piece or large pieces, these guys would have shed really little pieces like dandruff. So that's a really cool thing that we know about them. But the egg-shan formation is a very interesting formation. It was known by seasonal fluctuations that were either warm and humid and then punctuated by dry periods, with the environment becoming more arid. And the average yearly temperature during the time of the Barosaurus was about 10 degrees Celsius, or about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, with the relatively cold winters. And this formation is known for having great diversity. So it has animals like Yulong, Delong, Sootyrannus, Sonitrosaurus, Kaptorraptor, Confucianus, Psittacosaurus, Dobotite, and other animals like that. It would have been very rich in habitat with slugs and snails and insects and lots of really cool mammals and birds and everything. So it was a very rich, dynamic formation, and had lots of plants like cycads and horsetails and ferns and a very subtropical, temperate upland forest. And it's the kind of habitat the Ocean Formation is, and what the Barosaurus would have liked to live in. But yeah, really, really cool. I'm definitely a big fan of that. So I'll let them run off and do their thing. And luckily that's the last animal in there. So that was also done by Chocolate. Yeah, forgot to airlift it. Anyway, we've got another really cool animal also done by Chocolate. This is a mammal this time. We're going back and looking at Semirostrum. So this is a whale, species of cetacean. This is a porpoise actually, so let's have a look at, see if we can get a good, oh, that one looks nice. So this is Semirostrum. So Semirostrum is an extinct porpoise species that lived between 5 and 1.5 million years ago during the Pliocene. And the species is not too different in most ways than other porpoises, but the main thing that tells it apart is this really, really extremely long synopsis of the lower jaw that reaches a length of about 85 centimeters or about 33.46 inches, while that of a modern porpoise is only about 1 to 2 centimeters long. So they had a really, really long lower jaw. The main hypothesis that it may have used this long kind of jaw or lower jaw were to probe along sediments along murky estuaries and shores of what is now California, and then would have easily been scooped up by the symphosis and into the jaws. And the name meaning Semirostrum means half beak because the upper jaw is being half the length of the lower jaw, so it's got like almost like a half beak. So the upper jaw is much smaller, though I don't exactly agree with that hypothesis. I know that there was a study recently on a placoderm, so like a fish like Nucleosteus or something like that, that has this kind of like a half beak, and there's modern animals, modern fish that have kind of half beaks that use them for catching fish. So I think that may be a more likely ecology for them, like a reverse marlin is the best way to put it. So they think that could potentially be a more likely explanation of why Semirostrum had that Semirostrum. But yeah, it's nice to see a mammal in here. You know, we've had Basilosaurus in here before. But yeah, really, really cool. Definitely a big fan. So we'll let them swim off and do their thing. The great mod by Chocolate. So now we're moving on to the aviary. So we've finally got a pterosaur this time. So we have got a really, really cool animal. This is done by JWE2. We have got Tupaxia. Let's see if we can get a good... Oh, I like that posture of this guy. That's perfect. That's perfect. So this is Tupaxia. So these guys are of genus of large crested and toothless pterodactyloid pterosaur that come from the early Cretaceous or the Albian stage, 125 to 112 million years ago, and is found in the Romualdo Formation in the Santana Group in Brazil. And is considered a close relative of another pterosaur named Thalassodromaeus, and is believed to form a group called the Thalassodromaeanae, and placed within the family of Tapejaridae, which is interesting. So this genus was described by Alexander Keller and Diogenesis de Alamacampos in 1988, and this species was named Tuparexia longcrestatus, which refers to the familiar spirit in the mythology of Tupai, and the specific name means long-crested in Latin. So as mentioned, the holotype was found in that formation, and it consists of a snout and some partial wing bones, and mature individuals of the species had a long backwards swept crest arising from the snout, and much more fossil material has been found and shown considerable variation in its morphology. And some research has suggested this may be interspecific variety, potentially because of age, differences as ages or sex. But however, assuming there are different species present, so it could be either just different individuals of different ages and different sexes within a species, or potentially different species. But we're not going to get into that. The largest specimen is indicate has a wingspan of about 4.7 meters, about 15 feet, a body length of 2 meters, and a body mass of about 25 kilograms. And then in 1994, there was a second species named Tupaxia leonardi, in honor of Giuseppe Leonardi, which had a more rounded crest. And there was another one named by Mark Whitten, or kind of proposed by Mark Whitten, Deltodramius, were based on another skull, which means delirious or insane, And the name was actually a tribute to Shine On You Crazy Diamond by Pink Floyd, which is one of Whitten's favourite bands. However, this is considered nomen dubium, and then was also considered nomen dubium again, and thought to be a sister species of Carpodactylus. Be a really, really cool animal. These guys, as mentioned, are a member of Ashtarcoidea, so they are not related to Ashtarchids, but they are kind of a little bit closely related to them. They are assigned within Tapejaridae. However, some analyses suggest that they are closer to Astarchids, so things like Quetzalcoatlus, Hexagopteryx, those really big ones, than Tapejara and its relatives, which is quite interesting. So, as I mentioned, they're in the family Thalassodromidae, which is quite basal in the Tapejaridae group, so related to Thalassodromeus, which is quite interesting. And in terms of their paleobiology, which is quite interesting, they have once been suggested they were a fish eater on the coasts of South America, but some other hypotheses suggest it was actually a fruit eater. But however, based on its Ashtarchoid affinities, it was most likely some sort of terrestrial omnivore or carnivore. And the close relative, as I mentioned, Thalassodromeus, was specialized for larger prey, that these guys may have been going for smaller prey. They didn't have the same adaptations for dealing with larger animals, so they would have lacked such of those specializations. And a subadult was actually described by David Martell and Darren Naish from the University of Portsmouth in 2006, and had not yet fully developed its crest, so that actually suggests these large crests would have been something for sexual display, or sexual things like that. And the comparisons of the scleral rings, or the rings of bone in the eye, suggest that Tuparexia may have actually been diurnal, comparing them to modern birds and reptiles, so they would have been out during the day and doing their own thing. But yeah, definitely quite cool. Definitely a good fan of this guy. It looks really, really nice. So then now we're going to move on to here. We've got another really cool animal. We've got, by that one glitch, we have got Corythoraptor. I got the blue one because it's Prehistoric Planets one. Let's see if we can get here. There we are. There we are. Perfect. Perfect positioning. So this is Corythoraptor. So these guys are a genus of a raptor-ridged dinosaur from the late Maastrichtian, and it consists of one species, Sootyrannus, which is known from a single well-preserved specimen and is named after paleontologist Louis L. Jacobs. And you can see it's got quite a long, quite tall crest, very similar to that of a modern cassowary. It probably had a similar function. So as I mentioned, it was described by paleontologist Lu Xingchang and by colleagues in 2017. And the holotype is nearly complete and is an individual at least 7 to 8 years old, and only lacks distal caudal vertebrae, but includes the skull and lower teeth, and is one of the better preserved oviraptorosaurs from the late Cretaceous Neogene formation, which is quite cool. And what's interesting as well is not in a typical death pose, and the neck was actually in a circular curl, much like that of the type specimen of the Oviraptorid Halania, and we don't know why it died. And the name Corythoraptor refers to that really interesting crest, and the name Jacob C is actually in honor of American vertebrate paleontologist Louis L. Jacobs, who mentored 3 of the authors when they were in Texas, so it helped them with their PhDs. So yeah, nice to have an animal named after you. So Corythraptor boar, you can see that really tall crest, very similar to a modern cassowary. That is about 2mm thick keratinous sheath covering it. The skull is also, the crest is also pneumatized, so it's hollow, and features several chambers with thin bony walls, and is actually thought to be more pneumatized than that of cassowary, which makes it quite pliable, so it couldn't headbutt with them. And they also have relatively large eye sockets, which were also highly pneumatized. So they would have had large pits and with like a blood vessel flow onto the crest, so that suggests they would have had, you know, a keratin sheath, potentially something that would have been able lightweight and things like that, and a lot for their beak as well, and would have been toothless as well. So in terms of their kind of classification, they're an oviraptorid. They would have been related to animals like Dinosaurs and Sootyrannus, which is quite cool. And in terms of their diet, these guys would have been very similar in terms of other herbivorous dicynodonts, parrots, and tortoises. They would have been believed to be typically a herbivore with gastroliths, but they may have been a little bit more omnivorous than we give them credit for. So they would have eat lots of hard material, potentially, you know, eating small animals. They believed to eat very hard, drought-resistant plants that would have been in their habitat, and as well as nuts and seeds. They've also been proposed for eating shellfish, though living in an arid environment. They did not have a high shellfish population, but also as well, their skulls didn't seem well adapted for biting through, you know, the shells. And because there's lots of different species actually known from the Ganshu, they thought these guys would have been niche partitioning, so different species of oviraptors would have been eating different foods, so these guys would have been eating different than other species. Based on its kind of histological analysis, the growth marks indicate that the holotype was about older than 6 or 7 than when it died. And there were lots of like little bands that suggest that were indicate periods of arrested growth, which are points to seasonal growth spurts. And because growth restarted near the edge of the bone, they likely would have died at the beginning of a new growth stage, and it would have been a small adult or a young adult and not reached its maximum size. The crest did serve as a mating display, and would have suggested that the Tetrasaur was sexually active before it finished growing, and would have growth continued for more of 8 years. And at this point of development, it was about 1.6 meters, or about 5 foot 3 inches, which is about medium size for an oviraptorid. But as I mentioned, it's still growing a little bit, so it could have got a bit bigger, you know, maybe 2 meters or a little bit more, something like that. Could have been 2 to 2.5 meters, as well within the size range for these guys. So the function of the crest is very similar. As I mentioned, they seem to be quite similar to that of a cassowary. So they may have been used as a resonating chamber, or a way to dissipate heat, and a lot of, you know, hypotheses suggest that. However, it's most likely that they would have been used for display, potentially ornaments, you know, to show off their fitness or fight with each other. But like, they would not have been able to like bite each other. You know, could have butted with their crests, but they could have used them very similar to cassowaries as a display. And the cassowary-like crest and the sharp claws may have looked like a cassowary. You know, they would have kicked each other and used that for display. But they do not have evidence of, you know, they were able to produce low frequencies in using their crest. They may have been able to, but we just can't use it through their crest because it's just a hollow, you know, cusk. It's not something they would have used for resonating. And they have been compared a lot to cassowaries, of course. So they don't use it for, you know, making loud sounds. They use their kind of larynx and, you know, their syrinx and their big throat, which is something, as I mentioned, like they don't use it for making large calls or deep calls at all. They don't use it as resonating chamber, and that's the thing they always compare it to. So not a very good conclusion in my opinion. But anyway, in terms of paleo environment, it is a very rich environment. If you guys played or watched Prehistoric Planet, you would have seen it with Camptosaurus. Lots of other species of oviraptorids live it, like Dinosaurs and Baji and things like that. It would have lived with therizinosaurs, such as Nashingosaurus and Quinchaosaurus, the Tyrannosaurid, Garnosaurus and Sextentitan, which are both sauropods, Hadrosaur, Microhadrosaurus, and a lot of other really cool animals like ornithopods, nodosaurs, tyrannosaurs, you know, Semirosaurs, birds, pterosaurs, turtles, and a lot of very interesting animals that it would have lived with. But yeah, that's Corythraptor. We're going to let them run off and do their thing. That one glitch did a great job with these guys. So next up, we've got a fine animal. This is by Master Doot. How can you not love Master Doot? We've got Sootyrannus. Here they are, Sootyrannus. Oh, and it does that again. Always does that for me. Let's have a look at you. I like this one. So this is Sootyrannus. So Sootyrannus, which means Chinese tyrant. These guys are an early large-bodied genus within the family Tyrannosauroidea, and is known from a single species, Sinotyrannus carosarensis, and the only specimen contains a partial skull, some vertebrae, and a hip. And they were found in the early Cretaceous age Geotofontang Formation in Liaoning, China. And while it exhibited the greater body size seen in later tyrannosaurs, things like Tyrannosaurus itself, and Splendosaurus and Gorgosaurus and Albertosaurus, it actually is more closely related to earlier tyrannosaurs like within the Proceratosauridae, things like Proceratosaurus, Guanlong, Sootyrannus as well. And this family would originate in Jurassic, whose members are now in Europe and Asia, and lived with another early tyrannosaur, Sootyrannus, as we know, which have been oddly large when compared to most tyrannosaurs from the early Cretaceous, such as Dilong. Most of the world during the early Cretaceous was dominated by basal tetraneurons, such as megalosaurs and allosaurs, while tyrannosaurids themselves only taking over when both groups started to decline in the kind of mid to late Cretaceous. However, these guys kind of seem to be the exception, and they were doing quite well, along with Sinotyrannus and Sootyrannus. And actually, Sinotyrannus is the largest theropod from the Geotofontang Formation, reaching about 10 meters long, or about 32 feet long, and would have been about the same mass as a large rhinoceros. So that's quite interesting. They would have quite likely been an active predator, and is speculated to be like its close relative Sootyrannus would have had a feathery coat, in case with most basal Semirosaurs, and would have also lived in the rather wet environments with wet, well-watered forests and larger lakes, and these would have had a great diversity of animals such as Kaptorraptor and animals like that, very similar to the Yixian Formation. As I mentioned as well, Sinotyrannus is a very large tyrannosaur, weighed about 9 to 10 meters, or about 30 to 33 feet, and weighed about 2.5 metric tons, and is among the largest basal tyrannosaurids known, although reputedly kind of presumed trend of them being smaller and then getting bigger later in the Cretaceous, which is interesting. And as I mentioned, they are kind of original description. They would have could have been the earliest tyrannosaurid due to its large size, but other analysis on its anatomy suggests it would have been a Proceratosaurid. So related to things like Guanlong, Durotaranta, Proceratosaurus, Calexis, and things like that, and would have been related to them. However, it actually suggests to be a sister species of Sootyrannus, and it would still be related to things like Proceratosaurus and things like that. But yeah, really, really cool animal. I love how it's been represented. Love like the crest there and the. Sorry about the sneeze. I like the long crest and the little comb there. Master Dude really does a great job, giving us very interesting like models and things. Looks really, really cool. I'm definitely a big fan of that. So, yeah, I think this would be a great place to end the video. And really nice colors of these guys. But yeah, great place to end the video. So I want to thank, NetRaptor, Gojira Chief, Games Creative Art, Chocolate, as well as Trippy and That One Glitch, and also Master Dude for giving us these really, really cool animals here. So, yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to get that little bell icon to get notified of anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.